Now, you'll see that in this row of chairs, there's one empty chair, and it's not a symbolic empty chair. No, sometimes you do find empty chairs symbolically. PEN, which is an organisation that works for the interests of imprisoned authors and writers who live in oppressive conditions, often put an empty chair on the stage just to remind us of that. In fact, this case, it's for you to use. If you're feeling like you'd like to get into the conversation, you'll be sharing this seat with some elegantly placed fluffy animals. But what I'd ask you to do is that you can wander down, and if the chair is occupied, just wait back there in the corner. But if you'd like to come and make a comment, ask a question, something like that, feel free to do that as we go through. If no one does, it's fine. We'll struggle on anyway. But it's a chance for you to be involved in the conversation. The one thing I would say, though, is it's not permanently reserved for whoever gets there first. It's temporary. Somebody can come and say, I'd like to have a go, tap them on the shoulder, and if you can kindly give way. Just don't tap me on the shoulder. Oh, you're already up before we've even got going. Well done. Well, look, I'd like to start our conversation with something that was touched on by you, Jane.
I'll keep this one forward.
Never work with children and primatologists and their stuffed animals. Jane, you talked about solutionaries and the work that the Jane Goodall Institute has done to establish a program, Roots and Shoots. And when I was reading a little bit about it, and you touched on this yourself this morning, it was to do with, in part, an impetus of the younger people that you were meeting, and the condition in which you found them was in part described as despair. And I just wonder if that's our starting point when we're talking about the future. Are we beginning with a world in which many young people are feeling a sense of despair or hopelessness? And if you could talk a bit more about it, and then I might ask Anna if you want to jump in and see whether this is resonating with you, and anybody else, including you, if you'd like to comment on it too. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I was finding, I would say most of them, not despair, but apathy.
Right.
And apathy is a huge, huge danger in our society today. Because if apathy is caused by a lack of hope, because you think about the future, which you know, some of them do, then if our young people lose hope, we have no hope. We may as well give up, because this is, yes, I am the next generation, I am the future, said the 10-year-old boy. And this is everywhere. And I found particularly a lot of real depression in Asia, in Japan, in China, in Hong Kong, Singapore, the countries rapidly gaining in wealth. And there were so many young people I met who really cared about the environment, but they were being pushed all the time to, you know, no, you don't want to do the environment, you've got to do business, you've got to get money. And they came up to me and they cried. And they said, we don't know what to do. And they're being pushed by their parents, pushed by their teachers. And I thought, well, I'm not an Asian. I'm not going to get too much involved in this. But I said, maybe what you should do is to go along now with what your parents and your teachers are telling you. Make some money. It's okay to make money if you use the money for the right purpose. You know, the money in and of itself isn't bad. And then I said, don't give up. You can continue working for the environment, for animals, or whatever it is. And then come back to it when you've made some money and you're your own person.
My son has actually said to me, why didn't you become an investment banker first and then a philosopher? That seemed like I got it around the wrong way. Yeah. Anna, do you want to go first?
I'd love to.
Yeah, you have to speak into that, and probably just speak, it'll turn on.
I just wanted to come up here.
No, you'll need to
come up here and thank you for this opportunity, to ask Jane, you were speaking about the importance of money and people's different depictions of it. And I'd love to ask each one of you, with that in mind, what is success to you?
Okay, well, we're going to take that question on notice, because at the moment we just want to stick on the topic we're on at the moment.
Thank you.
But thank you. We'll probably we'll just put that into our memory bank, and if we can deal with success as it comes through. But if I can go back to you, Anna, that depiction of people either being in a state of despair or apathy, and perhaps being blocked in their own natural disposition to try and deal with some of the larger issues facing us all, does that resonate with you, or is...
I think for young people, especially in Australia, it's very obvious that we have a society that is set up to prioritise almost everything other than their future. We have governments making decisions focused on the next election rather than the next generation. We have corporations focusing on short-term business cycles, what's our quarterly profits. And when you're growing up in that kind of society and you see that the things that you want for your future, like a safe climate or education, look what's happening at the moment with education and health with this recent budget, it can be very easy to lose hope. And what I've found gives young people hope is when we're able to come together. Many people see young people as just consumers, but when we can reclaim that role as citizens, work with each other, and I guess define on our own terms what we want for our future and then work to try and get it, that's what I've seen give a lot of young people hope. But yes, I agree that there is a lot of hopelessness out there, and it's understandable because our society is not set up to prioritise the needs of young people.
So if you think about young people and as a group, proportionally, I mean, there are people like you, of course, who seem quite inspired and hopeful. Do you think that that is the minority or the majority of people amongst your age group and younger?
It's hard to make generalisations because young people is also a really big category.
Exactly.
But you know, the statistics I've seen on Australian young people is that we have the highest rate of volunteering. So I think that shows that young people are wanting to be engaged in their communities, and you don't do that unless you've got some hope.
Mm-hmm. What about you? How do you see it in relation to the hopefulness of young people?
I think that we, as young people, have a lot of power, and I think it was such a good quote previously of the 10-year-old that said, "We are the future." I think that was a beautiful thing to say.
Yep. Matthew?
Well, I think there's many factors. There's a cultural factor, as Jane said. You know, the society which are high achievement. You have to be the first of the class. You have to be a good consumer, and eternal growth with all these impossible things are more jaded because it's no fun. Just to be
yeah.
You know, what's inspiring about just getting more money? So it's just a waste of time. So, but in Latin Americas.
Yeah, okay.
So we'll cross off money from your success criteria.
In Hong Kong, I met him. He said 15 years ago, I wanted to make $1 million. I made 5, and I wasted 15 years of my life. So, but then I was in South America. And there was a school called the School of Joy, which is already a good start. And the kids were so incredibly enthusiastic. You know, and one of them said, you know, can I be the happiest person in the world? And I said, of course. And he said, yeah. And then there was 300 kids. And one of them asked me, do you eat meat? I said, no, I don't, since 45 years. And then I said, okay, I'll ask you a question. Are fishes your friends? And they said, yes. Are cows your friend? They all said, yes. Are birds your friends? They all said, yes. You want to eat your friends? They said, no. And Chile is one of the biggest meat-eating countries, you know, so there's a kind of schizophrenia. In France, recently, there was a teenager in Marseille who filmed himself throwing a small cat, a kitten, in the air, then against a wall. And he posted that on YouTube. The whole France was an uproar.
Yeah.
Okay. And then he was found through social media. They traced him down with all those techniques, and he was finally sentenced to 1 year in jail. The same day in France, 500,000 of those were killed, far from the eyes, far from the heart. You know, speak again of schizophrenia. In such condition, you know, a pig that is killed is about the weight of a 10-year-old child will weigh 150 kilos. A chicken lives 1/60 of their lifespan. I mean, this is mad. And this is not like, you know, there are abominable human tragedies, mass massacres and so forth. But fortunately, they come to an end. But then this is perpetuated year after year. They're only born to be killed. So those things are sort of something mental schizophrenia. And then a last point is that while we lose hope, I think it's also a lot of the media is somehow attracted to bad news. It's maybe because attention needs to be attracted to something that is aberrant and abnormal. But you know, at 20 years old, young American and European, I've seen 40,000 murders on TV. Fortunately, I think most of us may not have seen a murder, but certainly not 40,000. So that picture of human being leads to the wicked world syndrome. Then you lose hope. So we should more see the banality of goodness that is in our life, in the youth, than the banality of evil, that as we sometimes call it.
I just thought it was interesting yeah, please feel free to applaud. On the issue of the YouTube and the treatment of cattle and people's reaction, I thought it was fascinating, Jane, when you were speaking about the villages in and around Gombe, that your insight that they themselves needed to have their basic needs as they defined them to be fulfilled before you could reasonably expect them to care about others. And this I'm wondering whether when it comes to the humans generally, our basic needs are such that we often ignore them or misplace them in a sense, which is part of this pathology that you were describing. What do you think about this issue of young people and hope? Have you had much to do with this question?
Yeah, we have done many surveys and studies of adolescents and young adults in the United States, particularly focused on their view of the future and what they expected to do and so forth. And it is kind of disheartening to, we have a national sample of 4,000 13-year-olds, and we followed them up until they were 18 and so forth. And during these crucial years of adolescence, none of these young people expected to do much less than becoming doctors, lawyers, engineers, even though they weren't taking any courses in high school that prepared them for it. And then the average salary they came up with that they would make 5 years after graduating from high school was about $300,000 a year. So this whole kind of cohort coming up of young people, which included people who lived in the slums and the poorest parts of the country, they all expected to have an easy life, a professional and well-paid. But even though at some level they must have known that they were denying their own future and by making it much more rosy than it could be. But there is a kind of disconnect between the actual life and the kind of imagined future which is stoked by the kind of media that the children are exposed to from very early. And under those conditions, it's very hard to create a viable society in the long run when you find that everybody wants to be in control and wealthy, and there is no other vision that seems to capture their imagination, of doing something else than what they see the successful people doing.
It's remarkable, isn't it, that we seem to have bought into an idea that real value only lies in those things which are scarce. The supply and demand, where if there's 100 Smarties in a bowl and somebody takes 51 of them, then there's 49 left for the rest. But if you take something like friendship, I mean, I don't know exactly how many people are in this room, but we could all decide to be friends with everyone else without any scarcity at all in relation to that. There are these common goods which are in a sense infinitely divisible. But I think what you're saying in part is that the expectations of these people are built around things which are limited, like the money that you might have, access to prestigious positions, things of that kind. Look, one of the things, my hunches in this is, just tap him on the shoulder, is to do with how we start with a view about human nature. And you touched again on this. We didn't compare notes this morning, but it was extraordinary how many things that Jane said resonated with what I hope we might discuss today. And the German philosopher Immanuel Kant had this concept of what he called radical evil. And this was his notion, somewhat despairing in his case, that human beings could never actually engage in altruism. That there was always somewhere down... Yeah. If only we'd been there when Immanuel was writing this, we might have just gone... But you've got the general idea. You obviously don't think much of Kant's...
Well, I had a good opportunity to speak about 6 hours the other day about that here.
Yeah.
But you know, this is armchair science. There has never been a psychological, sociological science showing that universal selfishness is there. It's just not true. Those people who postulate that, whether it's Conrad Lorenz, Freud, or Kant, it just doesn't match with what we have seen. And then we see, Daniel Batson has shown that so far, 30 different types of experiment, the universal selfishness is not verified. We have seen with children that cooperation is very prevalent among children, Tomasello's work, that even 8-year-old baby, if you show them two people either being mean to each other or kind to each other, when they are given the puppet, they choose the kind one, all kinds of things that, of course, violence is there, it's a possibility, but at the same time, there's a very strong sort of natural tendency as social animals to be just good to each other.
Let's not just completely wave away the other view, because just for the sake of devil's advocate, literally in this case perhaps, given the way that Kant described it, their argument is that either it's the kind of selfish gene argument, that cooperative behaviour is serving some kind of biological requirement that we cooperate in order to advance our gene pool, or they're saying there is some disguised form of egoism so that we get a pleasant feeling out of being...
Well,
no, I missed it.
I'll give you one example. The guy who... It's a true story in New York. There's a black American staying with his 2 daughters. Someone fell in an epileptic fit, and then he recovers and falls on the track. Okay? So the metro is coming. So the guy jumps because he sees the guy is sitting, he will be killed, and then he lies down. Do you think this guy is going to think, oh, I'm going to feel so good after it's over, I get this warm glow that's so fantastic? Of course not. I mean, the warm glow is just, if altruism in itself intrinsically feels good because it's in harmony with our nature, and if it comes as a bonus, if it's not your goal, and if you go about helping others thinking, I'll get the warm glow with the selfish motivation, you won't get it, full stop.
Yeah. And,
Jane?
I completely agree. You know, when I'm talking to the young people, what I say to them all the time is, you know, roots and shoots, we really choose projects, we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and work hard, because you're going to sometimes have to work really hard to clear all the invasive plants out of a wetland or something to make it back beautiful again. And I said, you know, isn't it great? Because don't you find that the harder you work and the more exhausted you get and sweaty and stuff, the better you feel? This is a wonderful thing about human nature, that working hard, doing things that are good, helping each other, makes us feel good because it's the right thing to do. It's just echoing what you said. I agree 100%.
What do the psychologists think about this?
And to call that selfish is just stupid.
What do the psychologists think about this question about the possibility of altruism in human existence, at least?
Yeah, that has been a long debate for the past 80 years, that there is no such thing as purely altruistic motives, and that it's all a survival strategy to do good things for others, because then you would profit from it in the long run and so forth. But I don't think that argument is really been ever proven. It is simplified, a good simplification of what happens, but I do think that we are getting involved in a nature-nurture debate. I mean, on one hand, we think that it has to be a natural thing that to help others, whereas we have the potential to be altruistic, I think, genuinely altruistic, but it depends so much on what is available in terms of supports in the environment, the social environment in which we live. And if everybody is mean to everybody else, and that's the only way to get ahead, or the only way you get respected is because you have a lot of money, then you end up favoring those parts of your potential that feed into those expectations of the environment, and then you become that kind of person. And I think this is what we have to worry about, is how to create a social milieu, a system where people get recognized for expressing the good parts of human nature and supporting that instead of leaving young people to search for role models for possible things in the future, which involves violence, wealth, material well-being, and all of those things, which is the easy way out. And that in the long run destroys not only the individuals, but the whole society.
Yeah,
Jane?
I have to add one thing about this altruism thing. Because when I first suggested that chimpanzees could be altruistic, science poo-pooed. They can't. You know, that's unique to humans, just like emotions and all these other things. And of course, mostly what we see in chimp society is if a mother dies, then an older brother or sister will look after the kid. So that's just benefiting your genes. But there are occasions when a completely unrelated individual will adopt a baby. And in one case, it was a 12-year-old adolescent male. And by looking after this little orphan who was alone in the world, he risked his whole future status. He was attacked by the adult males when he ran in to rescue the little one. And can you tell me that's not altruistic? And if a chimpanzee can be altruistic, are we then going to say, well, they're better than us, they can be altruistic, but we can't, and they can't be altruistic, possibly because they can't have the moral kind of wherewithal to ask themselves if it makes them feel better or not.
I have found many examples through history which disprove Immanuel Kant and show evidence of altruism as a genuine attribute of human being. But the thing that finally nailed it for me was a picture inside the album cover for a musical called Miss Saigon. And it was a picture of a Vietnamese mother who inspired this, handing over her child to go to live in America where the father was, with no expectation ever of seeing that child again. Grief-stricken, you could tell just looking at the face, but purely for the love of that child and the different possibilities it might enjoy. And when people ask me, I just say, look at that picture. You know, if you have a question about that, there's no other possible motive other than pure love for the child that could explain that being done. Do you want to come in at this point?
Yes, first may I apologise for a wobbly voice if I have one. This is an intimidating forum. I'm Jenny, I'm a GP in Brisbane, and I come with two observations and one request to Anna in particular. But the two observations are I work a lot with young people, and in Australia, I write lots of mental health care plans for young people. And sometimes it just seems so devastating to me that we spend a lot of time talking about anxiety and depression when most of it, the think, feel, do line, if we can do stuff, it'll impact on our feeling, which will help us rearrange our thinking. And I've tried to find roots and shoots organisations within Brisbane to try and tee young people into to do something. First up, I did find a wonderful lady, but she's in Sydney, and it's very hard to get organisations in Brisbane, and one of the biggest problems is red tape. And you can't take your children on an excursion without having to sign 5 medical forms and 3 disclaimers about them falling over and mothers getting unhappy about their clothes getting dirty and complaints to the school body. And so number one is an observation of incredible red tape to allow organisations to take foot in Brisbane. And the second observation is our children are in that 10 to 18 group. And that's my request to Anna, is in that 10 to 18 group, a lot of us spend so much time with the goofy parents. You know, come and dig a veggie patch with us. Come and volunteer at the soup kitchen. Oh, Mum! You know, and so, you know, to have mentors that are relevant, because parents can only do so much. And, you know, we seem to be pushing for fitness, for healthy eating, for approaching life as a vegetarian, for being voluntary, for reducing consumerism, and echoing in my community other parents saying, all our children want to do is sit on IT. We can't get them outside. They don't want it. They're in the flow. They're in the flow of the computer game. And then you give them a challenge that is too big for their skill set, and they don't want it. They don't want it. And that, you know, maybe when you get to 18, you want stuff. But the 10-year-old who's the future, 10 to 18, is where I think, from my point of view, we need help. And people like Anna, Dale, everything you do looking forward to us oldies and all we're doing wrong is just extraordinary. But my request is to have people like you look to the 10 to 18-year-olds and help mentor them, because they are really where it's at. And
okay, thank you.
I might just say
Yeah,
something
I think
about...
maybe you want to respond. Yeah.
Well, so my role now is running Earth Hour in Australia with WWF, and I just started this role before Christmas, and I was amazed at the response we have from schools, primary schools and high schools. Over 7,000 schools downloaded our curriculum resources this year without us, you know, really doing very much. They were looking for it, and so I don't know how many of those downloads were teachers versus students, but certainly the stories and the photos that we got in, many were from students. And I think often when I talk to young people, and there's a very, very active group of young people in Queensland and in Brisbane with the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, if it's not a lack of hope, it's actually a lack of understanding about what they can do that makes a difference. And things like Earth Hour, which it's only one step, and certainly 1 hour is nowhere near enough. We're launching a year-round movement called Earth Hour Action so that people can do more throughout the year. But when it's clear what people can do and where it fits into a bigger picture, especially with Earth Hour, it's a global movement. So you have young people and old people in 164 countries as part of this movement to highlight that we need to act on climate change now. I think when it's clear, people are much more willing to get involved, and the more involved you get, the more hope you get, because you meet all of the other amazing people that are also working on this. And I think it's something that, I think it was Paul Hawkins said, that if you look at the problems in the world today, it's hard not to feel despair, but if you meet the people working to solve them, then you'd have to be an idiot not to feel hope.
I think, look, I've certainly had some tearful encounters, actually, probably on both sides, with younger people who've said, I know what needs to be done, I just don't believe that I can have an impact upon it. And it's that, I think it's not the loss of hope that things could be done, it's what's my capacity to affect change. Yeah. And sometimes it looks like a selfishness that people focus just on limited areas of influence, you know, their own backyard, their own immediate friend set. But maybe that's where you learn the possibility that your horizons expand. Do you want to say something on this? Otherwise, yeah?
I just felt we're taking over, we Queenslanders.
Typical. It's just typical, isn't it?
I just felt the urgent need to just inform everyone that Rotary International is running an international conference starting in Sydney on Sunday. And I guess if you're looking for a way of having impact where an individual can do so much, but a whole network of people all across Australia, all across the world, a network of people that includes young groups and encourages young groups, then look no further than your... I mean, Rotary isn't the only organisation, but it is a successful organisation, and Jenny was saying that, you know, all the red tape you have to go through, Rotary's already gone through those red tape steps, so that, you know, it's available to you in your community right now.
Thank you. So there are, and this is another good example of things that are there. We've agreed, I think we've all agreed that altruism is an aspect of human being, and that sort of suggests then that I wonder what you think about the connection then of goodness, being good, and being happy. Are they unrelated? Are they connected in some way? How do they connect if you think they are? Now, don't tell me you spent 6 hours talking about this the other day.
They are not only related, they are intrinsically, you know, the pursuit of selfish happiness is bound to fail. You make yourself miserable, you make everyone miserable around. And the expression of goodness is the twofold accomplishment of the good of others and your own. So,
do you think there's a common understanding of what it means to be good? Because the cultural issue that was introduced earlier on today may suggest that it's relative from one culture to another, or do you think that there is something that lies at the heart of the human condition which is consistently related to good?
I was very surprised and somehow shocked. There was a Davos Economic Forum made a survey of 20,000 between 18 to 25, and are there universal values? And it was all to Facebook, so you already have to be connected. And more than 50% said no, and I was a bit shocked. But then I realized that, you know, if coming from the World Economic Forum, you have a young Pakistani, universal values are universal values. They always think that you are trying to bring Western values to them, and they said no. But when we look at the values that they respected, it was, you know, respect of the other, you know, to be frank and honest, friendship, and you know, all these things that nobody would say to be fair to others is not universal. So if we were taking that way, I think there's some elements of basic, you know, goodness and being specifically good to others that who could say that is cultural dependent? I mean, who would not appreciate a gesture of friendship and help and kindness? So those are so fundamental, even below the level of religion or anything else, that need to give and receive kindness, for instance. And who could say it's not universal? It doesn't make any sense.
And even if you take, you know, the religions, in every single religion I've come across, the golden rule applies. Yes. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which is goodness, kindness. I mean, we don't want people to be bad to us. We don't want people to be unkind.
Just to apply the golden rule will solve so many problems in this world.
Yes.
You don't do to others what you want to do, full stop.
Here.
Before this session started, though, we were sort of canvassing amongst ourselves some of the things we might talk about. And I think, was it you, Jane, who raised, well, what do we make then of the person who finds themselves as a fundamentalist, maybe engaged in some kind of, whatever the religion happens to be, being prepared to use violence in their name? And were you wondering at that time whether that person might think that that was good to be doing that?
Well, I did. It puzzles me a lot, and I haven't got any answer for this, but I've spent hours puzzling about, you know, the fanatics in different religions. We tend to think of the fanatics now as just Muslims, but no, it's Christianity, it's I think all the major religions have their fanatics. And how is it possible that you can so brainwash somebody, which I presume is what happens, that they're prepared to tie a bomb onto themselves and go and blow themselves up and lots of innocent people? I honestly don't understand how that can actually happen, but it does.
Mihaly, do you know how it happens? Do psychologists understand what's going on?
Well, I think this is something that anthropologists introduced at the end of last century, that is going to different cultures, they found that very different things were considered good or bad. And so, for instance, if you go to some parts of India, one of the worst things you can do is eat a chicken within 10 days of your father's demise. If you eat chicken before the 10 days passed, you are a bad person. So the fact is that, in fact, the details of what is good or bad can vary quite a bit. But recently, they have shown, psychologists that are looking for how much of ethics is variable across the world, that there are at least two dimensions on which every culture agrees on: benevolence on the one hand, and aggression on the other. And generally, unless you are a headhunter in New Guinea, benevolence is better than the other side. But there are, even on that, there are a few exceptions. But basically, it seems like human society cannot survive unless you recognize that some form of help and brotherhood, sisterhood is better than aggression and conflict. And so that is a fundamental dimension of values across country. And there are other ones too, but there is another dimension, but this is the fundamental one.
It's interesting that we're talking in part about happiness. At least in the Greek world, when they used the word called eudaimonia as the aim of life. It's actually better translated, many think, as flourishing. And maybe there's a clue in that too, as to if you were to start from what enables human flourishing at the individual and group level within the context of the environment in which we live, you might start to see, again, this kind of convergence around ideas. Now, I'm going to ask to be relatively brief because there's a couple of other people. So if you could join us.
Yeah, sure. My name's Carol Schlesinger, and I co-founded an organisation called Kids Giving Back, and we provide volunteer opportunities for kids aged 6 to 18 throughout Sydney and Greater Sydney. And in the last 18 months, we've provided opportunities for over 1,800 kids to volunteer in different areas. And I guess my statement is that when you get kids from a young age to volunteer and give back and do good things, they grow up into being socially responsible adults. And so my focus is on, the schools and the, primary schools, preschools, doing things that enable their kids, their students, to do good things and give back. And so this, the roots and shoots, and your example of doing good things at a young age, and how that's made you into the person that you are, and all the thousands of people that you're affecting. So what can be done in a younger age through the education system? How can that be developed in order for kids to do good things, apart from, of course, kids giving back?
Yep, Mihaly?
Yeah, I think that's an important point that I want to make earlier when we were talking about what's lacking from the upbringing of young people these days, which, in my opinion, one of the most startling thing is how little sense of responsibility children learn anymore. I mean, it's something that it's not part of, they are so cosseted and protected within the kind of average bourgeois life that we have for them, that they don't realize that actions have consequences, and the longer consequences are beyond their horizon. And I think that is one of the basic facts. For instance, I was surprised that my son and his wife have 6 children, and they all send them to Montessori schools in San Francisco. It costs at least half of their combined salaries to do that. But they say in those schools, what they're so startled by at first was how much the children learn to take care of each other, and how during the winters when they come with coats, each child is supposed to help the other to hang the coat and to prepare their lunches and so forth and so on. Very little, very obvious kind of things that we used to learn this in the past because it was necessary to survive in a it wasn't a question of virtue, but necessity dictated that you learned about reciprocity and responsibility for the group. And because we don't need it anymore, this virtue is kind of disappearing. And I think it is essential for anything that happens later in life.
Why do you say we don't need it anymore, this notion? Why did you say we don't need reciprocity anymore?
Because our, okay, so for instance, I knew a very dear colleague who was from New Zealand, was born in New Zealand on a farm, and he said, you know, we had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to milk the cows before going to school. And before starting to milk, we stood in our bare feet in the droppings of the cow to warm up our feet because it was cold outside. And then we milked, you know, it took half an hour or so, and then if we didn't do it, nobody, the parents had other things to do, and we had to do it, and it was part of your life. That kind of the outside necessity of doing these things is no longer in most middle-class families. You don't have to stand in the dung of cows to be warm, or or get prepare the food, or get the necessities and so on. And yeah.
I'm going to stick with. Does anybody want to comment on this? Because I want to ask Mihaly a bit about some of these elements of flow.
Can I just say, I think we need it more than ever now with the kids today.
We need it more than ever. Thank you. Matthieu?
There's a small thing, I think in Nepal, and it's the same in Africa, you know, 8-year-old kid will carry a 2-year-old, and they do it so responsibly. If the mother is not there, they take utter care and responsibility. Yep. And about volunteering, you know, there was a wonderful study that kids between 8 and 12 were taken to volunteer in hospital to other kids. And if afterwards they were given a reward, or not given a reward, those who are not given a reward were much more inclined to come again, because then there was their intrinsic motivation to come to help. And you say, if it's just to get, you know, $2, you know, what's worth doing that? So I think, as you know better than me, Aristotle said that goodness or virtue is learned by practicing it.
Yeah.
And when...
Yep.
Yeah. Now, are you going to be brief? Right. I'm really keen on actual brief rather than theoretical brief. Yeah.
All right, very briefly. I just wanted to make a comment. I grew up in the 60s and the 70s. We were a very politically active generation. I lived through the 80s and 90s and was really saddened by the rise in consumerism, by the rise in the me philosophy. I have children, I have grandchildren. I work with young people with mental illnesses. I am so excited about this young generation. The people I work, they're ordinary people. My kids, they're ordinary kids. Their friends are ordinary. They're plumbers, they're apprentices, they're shop assistants. They don't have a university degree. They don't have those sorts of things. They play footy, they drink beer. They help people. They are passionate about the environment. They might not have a lot of direction in what to do with it, but they're getting there. They're learning the direction. They help each other. They help strangers. I am so excited by our current generation.
Thank you.
I think they're wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. This is just an aside. I actually wonder whether we're a bit like what it was like in the 1950s, just before the 1960s happened, where you've got this rather complacent generation that's in charge of everything, and there's this bubbling taking place perhaps underneath. And I sort of hope and half expect that there might be some real change just around the corner. I don't know what's going to trigger it though. But that's just an aside, sorry about that. Back to this notion of flow. I'm going to hopelessly paraphrase your work now, but one of the things that struck me was you talk about 3 core elements that need to be in place. One is a clear goal, by which you mean something much larger than just an instruction for a task. Secondly, instant feedback, so that people know what's happening. And thirdly, some kind of a balance between the nature of the challenge and the capacity to perform that challenge. That a ratio of about 60%, I think you quote. Is that a fair summary of those elements? I wonder what, if we took those notions and applied them more generally, not just to how to achieve a state of flow, but to educate, to encourage the growth of good people who are going to flourish, would they be applicable in a larger sense? And I'll ask everybody to think about this, than just in relation to something like flow itself.
Well, yeah, I think that those elements that you mentioned are being applied by educators in many places now, and they have been, even before the concept was called like that, they have been applied. There's a very interesting book actually by a British author who's very famous, but I'm blocking out his name now. It's called Island, and it's about a group that is survived of a shipwreck on an island, and they have to recreate a civilization. And it's a kind of utopian novel, but it's interesting. They develop an education system based on the fact that by age 5, all children learn to do rock climbing. And the reason for that is the island is very rocky, of course, okay, that helps. But the point is, educationally, that you learn to take responsibility for a life of a person, and you are allowing somebody else to take responsibility for your life. And it's a kind of a learning to understand that you have to expand yourself to help others and allow others to help you. And this is the fundamental thing that everybody has to learn before reading and learn and writing and so forth. So that's kind of...
And that is part of the instant feedback too. If you've got somebody on the other end, right, that reciprocal relationship. So, but you find these elements also in the work. I mentioned Montessori, Maria Montessori. Her notion is that all children are born to be explorers and to be creative and to be take risks, and that we suppress those tendencies in children through schooling, and her pedagogy was to renormalize childhood, to make children normal again, which the schools have deprived us from in the past. And most new school systems, the Reggio Emilia schools in Italy, and are based on this kind of notions of actually giving children a role in their own development and giving them the skills to master their own kind of tendencies for entropic behavior and focus and be able to live a good life. So I think... Now, a brief comment? or question?
A question, actually. So I'm Divya Hamnani. I'm the founder of the Intrinsic Brilliance Institute here in Sydney.
Can you say that again? What is it?
The Intrinsic Brilliance Institute here in Sydney. It's a resource centre to connect to the wisdom within. And recently I've begun to shift my focus towards adolescence after hearing Zoe Whale, the founder of the Institute for Humane Education, say that there are thousands striking at the branches of evil for every one that's striking at the root, and realizing that adolescence is where a bigger shift can occur. But the question that I have has to do with changing the system of the dissonance that you referred to, Matthieu, regarding that connection between what we're doing and what we're eating, right? Even in yesterday's mindful activity, that extra step to connect to the cows that are on the plain. Like, that's a space where, as a very passionate vegan, I learned long ago you can't change anyone else, you can only ever change yourself and your perspective. But I'm looking for tools and suggestions for how you might bridge that gap, even in a room full of experts like this one, to carry that through.
The gap between how we feel and what we say and what we actually do. You'll have to be the final person on that seat, by the way, because we're about to run out of time. So that's the question. Okay. Jane?
Well, I think it's you said this, Matthieu, but people don't want to know what goes on. And you say, well, come to an abattoir. And then you say, well, actually, I think you better not, because if you do, you won't sleep for nights and nights, because people don't know what goes on. It's like the Germans say they didn't know what went on in the concentration camps. And once you know, even if you haven't been, if you just read about the horrendous conditions of the pigs, the cows, the chickens, when I read about that, and I got back from Gombe, and I didn't know about intensive farms, and I heard about the intensive farms, and the next time I looked at a piece of meat on my plate, and I thought, this symbolizes fear, pain, and death. Do I want fear, pain, and death to be part of my life? No. And that was when I just stopped, like that. And I'm not a vegan, because traveling around the world the way I do, I think it would be really difficult and it would be kind of an imposition on the people I stay with, because it's very hard to feed a vegan. And also, it puts people off from taking those first steps, which will alleviate huge amounts of suffering, which is by not eating meat.
Okay, I'm going to ask, we have 4 minutes, so I'll ask you each just briefly now here to comment on modes of action, but also something about what success looks like, which was our first question. So, Anna?
For me, success is managing the climate change impacts that are already locked in and avoiding the worst impacts that we can't manage.
And moving from theory to action, what's the tool that you think is most effective?
I think for all of you in the audience, it's just figuring out what next step it is for you. And everyone's different, but I think if we think about systemic change, it's not just enough to have personal behaviour change. We need to be thinking about what our institutions are doing, our government, our businesses. And there's, I guess, a few questions that if you're thinking about your first step or your next step, you might want to think about. One is, who has the power to give us what we want? So if you're trying to change your organisation, or if you're trying to change your government, what do they want? What do we have that they want? Or how can we build what they want? So if you're trying to change a corporation, they want customers. If you're trying to change a government policy, they want votes.
Thank you. Matthieu?
I think there's a Buddhist saying that there's no big, difficult task that cannot be broken into small, easier tasks. So in a way, yes, I mean, when we speak of feedback, if you give a smile or if you free an animal from the butcher, you have instant feedback. The challenge with the environment is there's no instant feedback. So it requires a much greater wisdom and much greater determination. And that's why the individual change is necessary. And then when those change people achieve a critical mass, there can be a tipping point, and then the culture will change. So the fashion mutually sharpen each other. And when the culture changes, like when there was abolition of slavery, then suddenly people feel, well, it's not okay to believe that slavery is fine, because before it was okay. Now it's no more. So maybe it's no more okay to treat animals like that, and it's no more okay to treat the planet like that. So then you feel sort of it's not fine to be like that, so then you move to the side, the new ideas that have been brought about.
Jane.
Can I jump to a sort of individual success from
please.
planetary excess?
Yes.
Because one of the things that has really disturbed me is when we have a child, there are certain role models that are held up. And to be successful, you have to emulate these role models. You've got to be successful in sport or drama or business or politics or something like that. That's the successful life. And if we take the number of people who attain that level of success, it's rather a small proportion of the whole great mass of people. And I want different models out there. I want models of just people who are leading ordinary lives, but who are good, who are kind, who are altruistic, who are joyful. And, you know, if we have more models like that, and I'm not saying ordinary in any disparaging sense, because our main message for Roots and Shoots is every single individual matters, every single individual makes a difference every day. And there are all these people out there, no matter what they're doing, and we degrade them. We say, oh, this is a menial job. But a menial job, sweeping a road, a menial job, so you sneer at them, you look down on them. But they may be wonderful people living wonderful lives. They may enjoy sweeping the road. It's an awful lot better than these horrible machines that make all this noise and just sweep the leaves into a pile, which the wind blows away again. So, you know, that's my...
Well, when I left school, I couldn't afford to go to university, so my first job was as a cleaner up
Me
on
too.
mine. Oh, you too? Yeah.
We couldn't afford university.
I cleaned
I was
toilets
a waitress.
So I'm all for cleaners. It's what they do. Mihaly.
You're asking about the general definition of success or personal?
Well, the fellow who popped in, he said, what do we think success is for persons? Yeah, okay. I suppose it's the general rather than the particular.
Yeah, well, I agree with what most of, I think I heard, is that we found some of the most happy and people with the most meaningful life coming from all walks of society, and usually from the lower end of the distribution. I mean, people, assembly line workers who work under really pretty bad conditions and big, enormous factories building railroad cars and stuff, but who are so respected by everybody on the job because they can fix anything that goes wrong for anybody in the factory. And they say if once he retires, this whole enterprise may as well close because we depend so much on his intuition for how to fix the machinery. And then he goes home and he has a garden that he created by putting 2 or 3 lots over time together around his house, which has become a garden that mostly succulents, which are, he created the underground sprinkler system, which because he usually comes home at night, or close to evening, he also put in all kinds of lights that he found out that replicate best the spectrum of the sun, so he can create rainbows at night sitting on his back door by pushing buttons and the sprinklers start and then the lights go on. And this man was 64 by the time we talked to, and his wife live a pretty happy life, and he's productive, he's constantly innovating and so forth. A person like that, I think, is successful. And another guy really impressed me was a man whose whole job for the past 20 years was to fillet salmons for a delicatessen in Manhattan, and they made sandwiches out of the lox and bagels and so on. And he described filleting a fish as a work of art, you know, that he takes he says, every salmon is different, and I let it drop on the marble and develop a three-dimensional X-ray of how it's made so I can disassemble it with the least waste and the finest slices and the most, with the least effort. So you can imagine this man going home. He says, every night I go home and I feel proud about having done something that nobody else could have done as well as I did. And you know, these people, I think, are successful. They're happy. They don't show up on any of the measures that you would usually think of measuring success or happiness.
And I think that feeds in with my view, to offer my own answer. I think it's to be able to take whatever talents you might have and to develop them to the fullest extent possible, but in the service of some good that is other and greater than yourself. I think, in other words, I think it's around that notion of the goal which is larger, a clear purpose in which a meaningful life can be found. We've only managed to scratch the surface, obviously, at a session like this, but even having done so, would you please join with me in thanking Anna, Matthieu, Jane and Mihaly, and our guest at the end. Thank you.